That evening, London had just shrugged off the rain. The gravel drive to Whitmore Manor gleamed with silver streaks under the gate lamps, as if someone were scattering salt across the skin of the night. Amara Ellison wiped the sweat from her palms on the pleats of her teal silk dress, willing her breath to steady. She tipped her head back, letting a few curls free from the high bun like loosened waves. In the car, Edmund Hartwell leaned over to retighten his tie, though his eyes never left the phone face down on his thigh. "Don't touch my bride," Edmund said, half joking, half command, his hand resting lightly on Amara's knee. "I'll be back in the morning. Don't say things like that before we arrive," Amara murmured, though she herself couldn't explain why Edmund's joke made her skin prickle. "Sir Alistair Whitmore isn't the sort who enjoys grandstanding. He's a businessman," Edmund smirked. "Businessmen only care about the bottom line." The Bentley stopped at the stone steps. Mrs. Harriet Dunlow, the manor's housekeeper, opened the front door with the exactitude of someone who had served 3 generations of Whitmores. Light from the crystal chandelier poured out like a late sunbeam. Harriet dipped her head. Her gentle grey eyes studied Amara a second longer than usual, as if she had recognized, beneath the poise, a tension that had no easy name. "Welcome, Mr. Hartwell, Miss Ellison," Harriet said. "Sir Whitmore is waiting in the dining room. The kitchen has prepared lamb à la mint as you requested." "Perfect," Edmund replied, glancing at the phone that seemed faintly vibrating in his jacket pocket. Inside, Whitmore Manor breathed the scent of old oak, lavender sachets tucked into the stair banister, and the warm bouquet of sherry drifting from the sitting room. On the walls, generations of Whitmores looked down with a measured calm, the sort of assured composure of people born belonging. Sir Alistair Whitmore appeared in the dining room doorway like the opening sweep of a string section. Silver, threaded hair combed back, posture straight, a handshake warm, and never crushing the shake of a man who knew strength, lived in restraint. He smiled without showing teeth. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing whether his guests carried storm or dawn with them. "Miss Ellison, you brighten my house," Alistair said softly, extending his hand. Amara laid her fingers in his. The warmth slowed her heart by one beat. "You're too kind," she replied, wondering why a simple compliment should warm her throat. "And you, Edmund," Alistair turned. "I trust the roads weren't too bad. Kent had rain this afternoon." "A good deal is the same in rain or sun," Edmund said, his salesman's smile half raised. The phone in his pocket buzzed very lightly. Even so, Amara saw a fractional stiffness run through him. They sat at the dark mahogany table. Overhead, the chandelier scattered fish-scale light across crystal stems, and the slim band encircling Amara's finger, a ring far simpler than the large stones she'd seen on the wives of Edmund's colleagues. Harriet set down the starters, her movements precise and silent as needlework. "Before we talk business," Alistair said, "we eat. All negotiation is better when the stomach doesn't protest." Edmund laughed as though at a joke, but his eyes had already dipped toward his pocket. "Of course," he said, lifting his wine. "To our deal. To everyone's health," Alistair corrected, courteous but firm. Amara watched their host in secret. There was a way in him of making others feel smaller without obscuring them, like standing in the shade of a great tree. Cool, never suffocating, unbidden, her mind strayed to Canterbury, the little garden house of her father, the Reverend Joseph Ellison, where climbing roses hugged the windows, where the scent of morning black tea tangled with leaves and church bells. Her father used to say, "We learn to set people at the table before we set them on the scale." Edmund had looked at her with weighing eyes, at first in the tender way. As the days passed, the balance became plain. "Miss Ellison," Alistair broke the brief quiet, "Edmund tells me you once taught mathematics?" "Yes," Amara smiled, "at a small state school. I left after I married. A joint decision, or—" He let the question trail off like a footbridge. Edmund felt, "I deserved a life without ledger books," she said carefully. "I suppose sometimes people love by wanting to shoulder the load, and sometimes people love by carrying it together," Alistair said. Light but clear. Edmund chuckled, faintly derisive. "Is that the Whitmore school of marital philosophy?" "No," Alistair said, glancing at Amara before he looked at Edmund. "It's what I learned from my late wife, Isabel." Harriet set down the braised lamb. A breath of mint drifted past. Edmund apologized, drew his phone from his pocket with a quick swipe, and frowned. "Sorry, an urgent call from Singapore," he said, already standing. "Just a minute." "Edmund," Amara managed to whisper, "you promised. No work tonight." He laid a hand on her shoulder, a waxen apology, soft but cold. "I'll be quick, love, for our future." Edmund slipped away like a fish shadow. The dining room door fell shut, leaving a gap so palpable she could see the chandelier tremble. Amara sat still, hands faintly shaking. Harriet set a linen napkin beside her, as though what Amara needed now was the absence of words. "I'm sorry about that," Alistair said. "Perhaps I should make no phones a dinner rule." "It isn't your fault," Amara whispered. "He always believes that if he can just get through tonight, everything else will be fine. Do you believe that?" The question pricked the bubble skin of her composure. Amara looked down at the table's mirror-bright surface until it reflected her eyelashes. "I did," she breathed. "I believed very much." They ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable. Alistair told a few small stories about the Richmond Park Bird Sanctuary and the piano in the music room Isabel used to play on rainy afternoons. Amara nodded and sometimes smiled. She felt herself soothed by his calm, the calm not of indifference, but of someone who had stood long enough in storms to know how to latch a window. An hour passed, nearly 2. Edmund did not return. Amara's texts would not send. Her calls fell into a void. She pressed her lips together, drew a deep breath, and reminded herself not to cry before a stranger. Then Alistair set down his knife and fork, and his eyes darkened. "The east sitting room is always ready for guests," he said. "It would be unwise to drive back to the city now. The roads are empty and wet." And he stopped, as if afraid to sound overbearing. "You are very kind," Amara said hoarsely, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "You don't. Whitmore Manor has been more than I need for a long while." Harriet arrived on cue, as though that sentence were a bell pull. "The magnolia room is prepared, sir," she told Alistair, then turned to Amara. "There's a silk nightdress and a new toiletry set. Please make yourself at home." At home. The words rang from a far place. Home was her father's footfalls in the hallway, her mother humming while hanging clothes, the math papers she graded in a sun-struck classroom. Since following Edmund to London, home had been a white-walled flat so white it felt cold, and parties where she tried to remember the names of women wearing stones larger than her silence. On the way upstairs, Amara passed a corridor with black and white photographs of a woman, Isabel, she guessed. The woman's eyes smiled without help from her mouth. Amara paused at one frame. Isabel in a rose garden, touching a petal as if afraid to hurt it. Something in the photograph spoke of patience, the kind that knows beauty doesn't bloom in a night. The magnolia room smelled of jasmine-washed linen. Harriet fluffed the pillows, then opened a shelf to reveal a silk nightdress smooth as water. "These were the ladies," Harriet said gently. "Sir Alistair wouldn't let them be given away. She would want someone to use them." "Thank you," Amara said, fingers worrying the silk edge, her eyes stinging without warning. "She, Isabel, Lady Isabel. What was she like? The sort who made you feel kinder just by standing near?" Harriet smiled, the fan of lines at her eyes warm as woodgrain, like a piece of music that never needs to be loud to be heard. When the door closed, the room gave Amara back the faraway tick of a pendulum clock, the brush of wind through leaves outside the window, and the sound of her heart louder than all the rest. She sat by the window and set her phone on her lap. The screen was flat and black. Edmund was still silent. Fear took shape like an uninvited guest. What if that call hadn't been Singapore? What if all the scattered messages, the absent kisses, the tomorrows were only a blindfold? Amara tapped to call. "The number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable." She dialed again. Again, the same. Outside, footsteps paused so light you had to be keen to hear them. Alistair. He didn't knock. The door didn't shiver. There was only a brief stillness, like an offer. "I'm here, and won't intrude." Then the steps moved on. Gratitude rose in Amara, nameless and exact. Kindness, too, has its necessary distances. She tried the landline to the flat. After 2 rings, A young woman's slightly tired voice came on. "Hello? Sorry. Is this Holland Street? Apartment 14B? Yes, but we just moved in today." "Just moved in? Right. It's been empty since this morning. The removal company left a bag of women's things. It must belong to the previous tenant. Are you?" Amara's knees went soft. In the mirror across from her, she saw a woman in a teal dress, hair pinned neatly, face blanching like paper. "No," she said. "I dialed the wrong number. Sorry." The call ended. The echo did not. Empty since this morning. A short sentence capable of wrecking a life's order. Edmund had had it cleared out today, the very day he brought her to this house. Suddenly, Whitmore Manor, with its white columns and portraits of the dead, felt less a refuge than a precipice. Beyond it lay a vacuum. She did not cry, not from strength, but because tears, like money, require a source. Just now, she had none left. Downstairs, the piano sounded. Not a polished salon Chopin, but a slow melody that moved like someone counting their breaths. Amara rose and followed the notes to a high-ceilinged room, where Alistair sat slightly askew on a velvet chair, back a little bowed with weariness, a finger holding one long chord as if to stretch time itself. "When I can't sleep," he said without looking up, "I play this." Isabel called it a patch for silence. It doesn't mend the cause, but it fills the crack. "You don't have to—" Amara stopped, unsure what she meant to say. "You don't have to comfort me? You don't have to be kind? You don't have to use your wife's sorrow to bandage mine?" Alistair ended on a soft chord. "Have you reached Edmund?" Amara shook her head. The line's cut. The flat is gone. Speaking it made the truth denser, heavier. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing here." "For now," Alistair said, "you're here. In the morning, I'll have someone recheck the tenancy records, and Marcus, a friend in investigations, can help. But tonight, you don't have to decide anything." "Why?" Amara asked, the question leaping out before she could stop it. "Why do this for a stranger?" Alistair stared at the piano rather than at her. "When Isabel was about to go, she made me promise that if anyone ever came to my door with eyes like yours today, eyes trying not to break, I wouldn't ask why they'd come, but what I could do. I've waited 5 years. No one came. Perhaps tonight is the time." Amara gripped the chair to steady her hands. For a moment, a new map appeared in her mind. Roads that didn't lead back to Holland Street, didn't lead to Edmund's phone, but toward a garden she had never known, a garden that might need hands that could count beats the way they count prayers. "Thank you," she said, and then, without intending to, "for not looking at me like a number." Alistair smiled faintly. "I'm dreadful at that. Isabel kept the household accounts, because I habitually add things you can't add, such as trust, loss, and the way someone holds your hand." They were quiet for a while. Outside, the rain started again in scattered taps, drops like an old coat the night put back on. Harriet passed the doorway, set down a tray with ginger tea and crumbly butter shortbread, and slipped away as softly as she'd come. "I'd like to do something to repay you," Amara said, surprised to hear her voice sound steady. "Tomorrow, if you allow, I could go to the garden. I can prune roses. My father grows a great many." Alistair's eyes brightened as if someone had drawn back a curtain. "If you can, Isabel will thank you from wherever she's sitting to smile." "I can't promise much," Amara said, "but what's dead isn't always done for. It's just waiting for the right cut." "That is exactly what Isabel used to say." Alistair nodded. "Pruning isn't to hurt, but to make room for living." Back in her room, Amara faced the mirror. The woman looking back was still Amara, the deep brown eyes, the chin her mother called stubborn, the slight gap in her front teeth someone once said she should close. Edmund disliked that gap. Amara wouldn't change what she'd carried since she was little. She removed her earrings, set them in a box, and exhaled. Magnolia drifted gently about her, as if the room were whispering, "Tonight, be tired. In the morning, try being new." Her phone buzzed. Her heart jerked toward hope like a leaf to the wind. "Unknown number." Amara slid to answer. "Don't look for me." Edmund's voice cold as metal came through. No greeting, no apology. It was all a mistake. Our marriage has no legal standing. You should be grateful I left you somewhere safe. Good luck. Beep. The call ended like a knife driven home. Amara stared at the screen, bright, then dark, then bright again with her reflection no legal standing. The phrase drilled through layers of memory, the modest ceremony in a small Kent church. Her mother gripping her hand too tightly. Edmund smiling, reciting vows, his fingers trembling. 50 people had stood there. Had they witnessed an empty rite? She felt the blood drain from her limbs, leaving her skin like paper about to burn. She couldn't cry, couldn't breathe. She opened the window to the cold, then gagged. The teal dress hugged her body the way you hold an absence. Below, the piano began once more this time, a nameless tune with only a steady pulse. Amara heard footsteps under the rain. Someone gathering broken rose canes. A man reminding himself to stand straight without letting another's shadow fall across him. She closed her eyes, pressed her brow to the cold frame. Through the blur, she thought of her mother Miriam and her voice. You are not someone because of a piece of paper. You are someone because of how you stand when the wind shifts. She thought of her father, the climbing roses in Canterbury, and the afternoons he taught her to cut close to a bud eye, so the new shoot would break cleanly. She thought of Isabel, a stranger to whom she suddenly owed thanks for a silk nightdress that lay dry and cool against her skin. She rested her forehead there until the chill seeped into her bones, then shut the window. Before switching off the light, she slipped off the slim ring, the simplicity that had once felt right, and set it on the bedside table. Stray shards of chandelier light from the hall struck the band into bright specks, like the cells of a rainbow shattered halfway down the road. The night swallowed what remained of the day. Near dawn, Amara dozed. She dreamed she stood at the edge of a vast garden, pruning shears in hand. Before her, a rosebush tangled upon itself, cane on cane, leaf on leaf, thorn snagging thorn. She heard her father's voice from far off. Don't be afraid to cut deep, my girl. Hurt once to live many times. As she set the shears, the wind settled, as if making way. Birdsong woke her, the faint titter of tits beneath the eaves. Dew clung to the window frame, glinting in delicate rings like wedding bands, rings that needed no hand to exist. She sat up, her whole body heavy as if she had carried an invisible trunk, and yet, within that heaviness, a fine thread like a suture tugged her toward the window, toward the garden she had not seen in daylight. She pulled on the light cardigan Harriet had set out, suddenly aware of lavender and soap in the knit, a scent of something clean, something decent. She smoothed her hair, went without makeup, opened the door, and stepped into the corridor. In the frame on the wall, Isabel smiled again. Amara dipped her head to the woman gone, the way one greets an elder sister one never had. Descending, she found Alistair looking at the great window over the grounds. He was already in a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, no tie. He looked as though he'd slept little. At the sound of her steps, he turned with a half smile. Good morning, Miss Ellison. Good morning. Amara paused a beat, then added, Thank you. For the call last night. I mean, for the music. It kept me together. Alistair nodded, like a man who had just tallied a sum and found it positive. Would you like to walk in the garden? You'll want to look before you take up the shears. There are shears. He pointed to the wooden cabinet by the door. 2 pairs. Isabel always kept them in 2s, in case someone wanted to learn. They stepped onto the porch. Morning air carried damp earth, wet oak, and a hint of mint from the lawn. The rose garden unfurled like a map of crisscrossing lines. In many corners, the bloom had gone past. In a few clumps, soft new canes had been left to grow whichever way was easiest rather than best. The old beauty was still there, veiled by a film of fatigue. Amara knelt by a climbing Eden, touched a cane, and felt the quiet thrum beneath its brown skin. They're not dead, she said, voice firming. They've just not been told they can be beautiful again. Can you tell them? Amara took the shears. The blades opened, closed, a crisp little snip. The extra cane dropped, leaving a clean cut above a bud eye. She worked with the focus she gave a hard paper, cautious and resolute at once. Alistair stood an arm's length away, offering no instruction, only a steady hand to hold a stem now and then. "Edmund says marriage is a deal," Amara said as she cut, as if speaking to the plants. "He isn't wrong in the sense of contributing together, but he forgot that a partner isn't an asset. People tend to miss that when they see themselves as the majority shareholder," Alistair said, eyes following her movements. "And you? Are you the partner, or the acquisition?" "Last night," Amara said, "I thought I was a liquidation item. This morning, standing here, I want to think otherwise." "Otherwise? How?" "That I decide what to cut so I can live, not which deadwood I must accept." A breeze lifted, pinning stray baby hairs to her cheek. Alistair reached out, stopped mid-air, then withdrew and offered his handkerchief instead. Amara dabbed her brow and smiled her thanks. Harriet brought 2 black teas to the steps. "I'll fetch a few cakes after," she said, eyeing the fallen trimmings stippling the paving. She would be very pleased. "She?" Amara asked. "The lady," Harriet replied, her smile retreating fondly into some far country. "She always said, 'Roses are the one thing that lets you cry and still makes you stand upright.'" By the time the sun cleared the roofline, the garden had become tidier, breathing easier. Only a little, but a little was enough for Amara to see she could change a landscape, however small. Fine thorn scratches stung her hands, real hurt that assured her she was still here. Edmund had vanished with the flat, his no legal standing call, and a plan she couldn't yet guess. Yet in this moment, in a stranger's garden with pruning shears and the smell of black tea, Amara understood her story hadn't ended in the night. It had placed a semicolon, a pause, that lets the sentence change its gait. Alistair set a cup into her hands. "Would you like, after we finish in the garden, to ring a friend? Marcus Halloway. He's not a talker, but when he speaks, things move." Amara looked at the fallen canes, the proof she'd dared to cut. She nodded. "Yes. If it's going to hurt, I want it to hurt in the right place, and to know its name." Alistair smiled, the kind that seldom reached his mouth, but when it did, it brightened the day by half a degree. "Good. Then today, we name things." A late rose opened at the garden's edge, where the trellis was still in knots out of season, not washed out. Amara lifted it with her palm and did not pluck it. She thought perhaps her life would bloom again later, different, but no less fragrant. And somewhere in the rustle of leaves, she heard an old voice. "Don't fear the cut, my girl. Don't fear beginning again." Across the veranda, Whitmore Manor stood silent, a witness. Last night it had been a cliff. This morning, it was a way station. Tomorrow, Amara did not know. But she was ready to take another step, the shears clicking a clean snip, opening just enough space for light to come through. The magnolia room turned stifling when darkness fell again. Amara lay listening to the hallway pendulum clock, each swing a reminder that Edmund had been gone far too long. She had thought he would return in the morning with an explanation, a familiar smile, or at least an apology, but when dawn rose, only sunlight poured into Whitmore Manor's sitting room. There was no sound of a Bentley's tires on the gravel drive. Alistair kept his word. He sent for Marcus Halloway. Inspector Halloway was tall and broad-shouldered, in a plain grey suit with deep, dark eyes, the sort that made people respect him and fear him a little. He arrived without fanfare, carrying only a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. Harriet led him into the sitting room, where Amara waited with her hands clasped so tight they'd blanched. "Miss Ellison," Marcus inclined his head, "Sir Whitmore has briefed me. I need to hear it from you. Every detail, however small." Amara drew a deep breath. Telling it from the beginning was both challenging and necessary. She spoke of the evening, the phone that kept shivering like a coiled snake, the hollow apology, and the perfunctory kiss to her forehead. She even told him about the final call, the admission that the marriage had no legal standing. Her voice trembled at first, but grew clearer as she went on, as though each word nailed the truth to the floor to keep it from sliding away. Marcus took notes without interrupting. When Amara finished, he looked up. "I need to verify the Holland Street flat. If it's as you say, he had it cleared ahead of time, which means abandoning you wasn't impulsive. It was planned." "Planned since when?" Amara asked, her chest tightening. "At least a few weeks. There are signs he paid the removal company last month." It felt as if a piece of ground gave way beneath her feet. While Edmund had been holding her hand at parties, somewhere else he had been scheduling her erasure from his life. Alistair sat opposite, gaze steady and voice softened. "What matters is that you're safe here now." Safe. The word felt like a blanket and a cage at once. Amara didn't know whether to breathe out in relief or break down. At noon, Harriet walked Amara through Whitmore Manor to help her grow familiar with these new walls. From the library thick with old leather, to the music room with its grand piano, to the dining room where light fell across the mahogany table everywhere, bore Isabel's traces. A lace handkerchief left half embroidered, a photograph in a frame, a potted plant, long dried that no one had the heart to throw away. "Sir Whitmore keeps everything," Harriet said. "He says memories don't clutter. They only remind us we were happy once." Amara touched a picture of Isabel smiling in the rose garden. "And if we've never been happy," Harriet regarded her with gentle, incisive eyes, "then we learn to make it. Nothing stops you from planting a new garden." Toward evening, Amara returned to the magnolia room. The wedding ring lay quietly in the small wooden box on the table. She turned it in her palm. The late light broke into a brief rainbow shard. If all of it was deceit, then who am I? The question spun round and round her mind. A soft knock at the door. Alistair stood there without a tie, in a white shirt with sleeves rolled up. He didn't step in, only paused on the threshold. "I'm going to check the south garden. Would you like to come?" Amara nodded, not from eagerness, but because another minute in this room would choke her. They went out along the long wood-floored corridor. The south garden was wilder, less tended. The roses there had withered more. The canes writhed like the messy script of someone who'd abandoned a story mid-sentence. "What do you think?" Alistair asked. "Neglected too long, but still alive. Prune and feed them, and they could come back. Much like people," Alistair said. The words stopped Amara for a beat. Last night, she had felt like a cast-off surplus thing. Standing before the rose beds this morning, she sensed another possibility, not an ending, but a new season. Night fell, and Amara sat again by the window. The phone stayed silent. No messages, no calls. Outside, the wind threaded the trees, carrying damp earth and the scent of crushed roses. In that silence, she understood Edmund would not return. Not tomorrow, not next week, never. And in that same silence, she realized that if he had disappeared, she was obliged to appear. For the first time since her wedding night, Amara no longer considered Edmund the center of her life. Instead, she thought of tomorrow, of Inspector Halloway, of the answers he would uncover, of that tangle of a garden and the pruning shears that fit so neatly in her hand. A chapter had closed, but not the book. 2 days later, Inspector Marcus Halloway returned to Whitmore Manor. The London sky was draped in leaden clouds. Drizzle fell like grey dust across rose canes that had not yet been revived. Amara sat on the veranda, pruning shears in hand, staring at a fading bloom she couldn't quite bring herself to cut. Heavy footsteps crunched on gravel. Marcus approached. Harriet beside him, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes carried a tautness that betrayed concern. "Miss Ellison," Marcus began, his voice low and steady, "I have the first results of the investigation. They may be difficult to hear." Amara set down the shears, her heart pounding so hard it hurt to breathe. Alistair stepped out, positioning himself just behind her like a wall against the wind. Marcus opened his leather notebook and flipped a few pages. "Edmund Hartwell does not exist in any legal record." Amara frowned. "Does not exist? What do you mean?" "The name is a shell. He was born in Birmingham as Lawrence Bridges. 5 years ago, he legally changed it to Edmund Hartwell right before marrying a woman in Brighton, Lady Eleanor Fairfax. They have 3 children, which means your marriage to him has no legal standing." The ground seemed to slip from beneath Amara. She gripped the arm of her chair to keep from collapsing. Images flashed before her. Her father leading her into the small Canterbury church, the minister's voice blessing their vows, her mother dabbing joyful tears. All she had held sacred, revealed now as stagecraft. "You were never his wife," Marcus said evenly. "You were a victim in a string of cons." Amara felt her heart break and hollow at once. Not his wife. meant she had never had a rightful place in Edmund's life. Never the right to call him husband, never a marriage. We also uncovered, Marcus continued, that he is heavily in debt, recently dismissed from his company under suspicion of embezzlement. Every penny he lived on came from borrowing, promises, and exploitation. Exploitation of whom? Amara asked, her voice raw. Of women like you, Marcus said plainly. Women who had just lost someone, or who were vulnerable. He appeared at the perfect moment, posed as a savior, then bound them into a fraudulent marriage. Amara closed her eyes, nails digging into her palm. Each word was glass-driven into memory. Edmund at her father's funeral, true. Edmund looked at her as if she were destiny, true. Edmund urging a hasty wedding, true. None of it love, all of the calculations. Alistair rested one hand on the back of her chair. He didn't touch her, but his presence steadied her breathing. Miss Ellison, Marcus said more gently, I know this is heavy, but you need the truth if you are to protect yourself. Amara opened her eyes. Tears welled, but did not fall. Protect? From whom? From him, Marcus replied, and from self-blame. He is a professional fraud. No one blames victims for being deceived. Responsibility lies with the man who staged the play. Amara rose and walked a few paces into the garden. The rain pattered lightly. She lifted her face, letting it sting her eyes, cold, but real. She was trembling and remembered her father's words. Truth, though painful, is the ground of freedom. She turned back, meeting Marcus's gaze. I want to know everything, however harsh. I will not live in the dark another day. Marcus nodded. I'll dig deeper, but I promise we will find him, and he will not do this again to anyone else. Alistair stepped closer. And I, he said firmly, will see that you don't face this alone. Amara looked at the two men, one a bearer of justice, the other of human kindness. Amid her wreckage, she felt a new footing beneath her, not Edmund Hartwell's wife, but Amara Ellison, a woman who would claim her own fate. The rain thickened, but she did not run for shelter. She stood, letting the water wash away layers of paint, the disguises Edmund had draped over her life. What remained was truth bare, but unshakable. That night, Amara did not sleep in the Magnolia Room. She moved to the library, sat by the window, opened a blank notebook, and began to write. Not to Edmund, he was unworthy, but to herself. Today I learned I was never his wife, but I also learned I have never ceased to be myself. He may take my name, my home, even my trust, but he cannot accept that I am still here, with voice and choice. From tomorrow on, I will use that voice to call him what he island. When she closed the book, the rain had stopped. Outside, a late rose, drenched and heavy, opened beneath the pale moon. Amara looked at it and thought, if a rose dares to bloom in cold rain, I too dare to live in truth. 3 weeks later, Amara's body began sending strange signals. Each morning she woke nauseous, exhausted, weighed down as if carrying stones. At first, she blamed sleepless nights, the strain Edmund had left behind. But when her cycle was more than a month late, denial was no longer possible. One early morning, before sunlight filled the windows, she sat trembling in the bathroom, a test strip in her hand. 2 red lines appeared, unmistakable. Amara placed a hand on her stomach, and a tide of feelings surged: fear, shock, and hope. A child, a fragile life. Proof that though her love with Edmund had been a lie, something real had remained. She kept the secret at first. It was Harriet who noticed, seasoned by a woman's long years. You eat poorly, your skin's pale, and I see you rush into the hall every morning. Is it? Amara lowered her head, unable to hide. I think I'm pregnant. Harriet squeezed her hand firmly. That is a blessing, however it arrives, but you must see a doctor. Amara shook her head. I don't want Alistair to know. I don't want him to think I'm another burden. Harriet only sighed, wisely silent. Some truths a woman must face on her own, but her body refused secrecy. Fatigue dulled her. Emotion welled without warning. Sometimes she sat in the rose garden, shears forgotten in her lap, lost. Once, Alistair found her clutching her stomach, eyes shut tight, sweat beading. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, edged with worry. Amara forced a smile. "Just tired. I'll be fine." His gaze lingered on her pale face, but he didn't press. He said, "Remember, no one expects you to endure alone." The fragile hope didn't last. One autumn night, Amara woke to sharp cramps. At first, she thought it was her stomach. Then, blood soaked the sheets. She collapsed onto the floor, calling Harriet with shaking breath. Within minutes, Alistair appeared too, his usually composed face struck with panic. He lifted Amara, wrapped her in his coat, and rushed to the car. They took her to the private clinic of a trusted female doctor. Under the harsh white lights, with the steady beep of a heart monitor that suddenly fell silent, Amara knew. The child was gone. She lay motionless in the hospital bed, her eyes hollow. The doctor said the familiar words, "It isn't your fault. Stress, a weakened body. These things happen." Harriet wept quietly, while Alistair sat at her side, holding her hand. He didn't speak, but the grip was an anchor. Amara turned her face away, but in the end, she let him hold on, reminding her that at least this grief didn't have to be borne alone. By dawn, they returned to Whitmore Manor. Amara walked barefoot into the garden, her feet pressing the wet grass. Roses hung heavy with dew, each drop shining like a tear. She whispered, "My child, I couldn't keep you. But I loved you, even for only a few short weeks." She sank to the ground and buried her face in her palms. And this time, she let the tears fall. No restraint, no composure, only a mother mourning her lost child. Alistair stood at a respectful distance. He didn't intrude, but when Amara lifted her head, she found his gaze full of knowing. "Isabel and I lost 3 children," he said softly. Each time she gave them names: Hope, Grace, and Joy. She believed their souls remained, only not with us for long. Amara drew a ragged breath, eyes swollen. "I'll give her a name too. She'll be Faith, because she was the last faith I had." Alistair's eyes glistened. He nodded. "Then from today, this garden will have a place for Faith." In the days that followed, Amara could not yet smile. But within her, a new thought took root. If a false love could create a real child, then from this loss she could grow a new life her own. One night, listening to Alistair play the piano, Amara no longer felt like the abandoned bride. She felt like a woman relearning how to rise, her heart fractured, yet still capable of trembling. And she believed Faith would bloom again as a flower somewhere, proof that not all of her had been lost. After long days sunk in grief over losing Faith, Amara realized her body could not remain cloistered in the Magnolia Room forever. At dawn, with mist draped over Whitmore Manor, she wrapped herself in a wool cardigan and stepped into the garden. The grass was still heavy with dew, the air damp and cold, yet the roses strained upward here and there, reaching for the light after the long night. In her hand was the pair of pruning shears Alistair had given her. The silver blades caught the first rays of morning. She knelt before an old tangled rosebush. With a single clean snip, a dead cane fell. And strangely, at that instant, she felt a shadow inside her chest also give way. From the window, Harriet watched with a quiet smile. She had seen many women reclaim themselves through gardening, but Amara possessed a rare mixture of patience and resolve. That afternoon, Alistair joined her. He wore a simple shirt, rolled sleeves, and carried a bucket and gloves. At first, he stood aside, then bent to help pulling weeds, lifting canes for her to cut. "Have you given this bush a name?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Amara shook her head. "I never thought flowers needed names." Isabel believed every rose was a story. Naming them was a way of remembering. Amara studied the bush before her, which was sparse with a few small buds. "I'll call it Phoenix, because it still wants to live again, though it's withered before." Alistair nodded, his eyes gentle. A worthy name, but word of Amara's presence at Whitmore Manor could not remain hidden. One late afternoon, while they worked in the garden, the growl of a sports car engine broke the calm. A tall man in an immaculate suit stepped out, William Ashford, Alistair's longtime business partner. "Alistair," William called, though his eyes fixed on Amara. "I didn't expect to find such company here." Amara rose, shears still in hand. William looked her up and down, his gaze laced with disdain. "She's, what, the new gardener? Since when have you hired this sort of person?" Amara froze, heat rushing to her face. But before she could speak, Alistair stepped forward. His voice was calm but iron-bound. "This is Amara Ellison, my friend. She has as much right here as I do." William smirked. "Your friend? Alistair, are you joking? After Isabel, you drag in some girl from nowhere and bring her into this house. People will say she's using you." The air thickened. Amara's grip on the shears tightened, her blood surging, but before she could retort, Alistair's voice cut sharply, colder than she'd ever heard. "William, I'd rather lose any contract than let you or anyone insult her. If this is how you see women, then we have nothing to discuss." Silence fell like a blade. William faltered, then let out a contemptuous laugh. "You'll lose £50 million for this noble act, Alistair." "There are things worth more than money," Alistair replied, his gaze steady on Amara. William turned on his heel, slammed his car door, and roared away in fury. When calm returned, Amara turned to him. "You didn't have to do that for me." Alistair wiped his hands, his expression unwavering. "I did it because it was right. No one has the right to make you a shadow to be trampled." Her throat tightened. She had grown used to Edmund treating her as a possession, a figure to be measured, weighed. But now someone had stood for her, not for gain, but for respect. She looked down at her hands, scratched and reddened by thorns. "I don't know if I'm worth what you've lost." Alistair gave a faint smile. "Amara, you don't have to prove worth. Your being here is enough." That night, Amara lingered alone in the garden. The rosebeds were trimmed, the paths brighter in the moonlight. A soft fragrance drifted on the wind. She thought of Faith, the child who never had time to grow. She thought of her father, of Canterbury. She thought of Alistair, who had staked his honor to shield her from contempt. And for the first time in months, Amara felt she was no longer the abandoned bride. She was the caretaker of a garden returning to life, and in that act of tending, she too was reborn. One early winter morning, as fog lay thick over the hedges of Whitmore Manor, the doorbell rang. Amara was in the garden when she saw Harriet hurry to the entrance. A moment later, a voice she thought she'd only ever hear in memory called out, "My daughter? Amara." She froze, clutching the shawl at her shoulders, then ran to the gate. Miriam Ellison, small in frame but with eyes burning bright, stood there with an old suitcase. Amara threw herself into her mother's arms, weeping like a child. "Mama, I'm sorry, I didn't write. I was afraid you'd worry." Miriam held her by the shoulders, peering into her tear-stained eyes. "Worrying is a mother's task, but hiding from me, that is your mistake. You've grown thin, Amara." In the sitting room, once they were seated, Amara recounted everything. Edmund's disappearance, the final phone call, Marcus Halloway's revelations, Faith, and the miscarriage. Miriam sat silent, hands clutching her wool scarf tight on her lap. Only when Amara stopped did she speak, quietly but firmly. "Your father once told me, the truth may break your heart, but it is the only soil on which you can sow again. Mama, I feel foolish. I trusted him. I gave up my work, myself." "No, child." Miriam lifted her chin. "To believe in love is never foolish. To exploit love, that is the crime." Alistair, who had listened silently nearby, now met Miriam's gaze. It was steady, but her look was searching. "Sir Whitmore, I thank you for sheltering my daughter, but I must ask, do you keep her here out of kindness, or for some other reason?" Alistair answered without hesitation, "Because I respect her, and because I believe she deserves a safe place to rise again." Miriam studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, as if satisfied with the weight of his words. That afternoon, a legal letter arrived. Harriet brought it in, and Amara's hand shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers, but not to free her. Under his actual name, Lawrence Bridges, Edmund accused Amara of desertion and demanded half of her inheritance from her grandmother. Amara stared, stunned. He, He wants what little I have left. Miriam leapt up. No, not a penny more will you give him. Amara let out a bitter laugh. Mama, he knows I want this over. He knows I'm tired enough to pay for peace. No, Alistair cut in, his voice like ice. This is extortion. He is the criminal, not you. If needed, I'll put my lawyers on it. Amara turned, her voice trembling but firm. No, Sir Whitmore. This is my fight. I will not be the victim waiting to be rescued. Not this time. That evening, Alistair's lawyer arrived, Benjamin Cross, a silver-haired man with keen eyes. He scanned the papers, then scoffed. He's bluffing. The marriage was never valid. Legally, you owe him nothing. In fact, you have grounds to charge him fraud, bigamy, deception. I don't want money, Amara said. I want freedom. Then we'll give him freedom, Benjamin replied. But on your terms. We'll send a reply stating we know the truth. If he presses further, we hand everything to the police. He'll realize quickly who holds the knife. Amara looked down at the documents before her. For the first time, she felt she wasn't running anymore. She was striking back. When Benjamin left, Miriam sat beside her. Today, I saw a different you. No longer the Amara who trembled in Canterbury when your father died. You've learned to stand upright in the wind. Amara leaned against her mother's shoulder, whispering, Faith taught me that. I couldn't keep her, but I can keep the strength she left me. Miriam wiped her tears. Then use that strength. Cut him off, the way you cut away dead rosewood. Amara nodded, her eyes lit with resolve. This time, she didn't only want freedom, she wanted ownership of her life. Standing on the veranda overlooking the garden that night, she heard the piano from the music room. Alistair played a steady, warm melody, not mournful, but urging. She closed her eyes, letting it wash through her, and promised herself, tomorrow I will sign the response. Not to end a false marriage, but to begin an authentic life. Amara signed her name on the legal response the same day a rare storm swept across London. Wind howled through the ancient oaks, whipping dry leaves into spirals, rain lashing the windows of Whitmore Manor like a scourge. Harriet had readied candles and oil lamps in the sitting room in case the power failed. Miriam sat by the hearth, fingers moving over her rosary, whispering quiet prayers. Alistair checked every shutter and latch. When he crossed the veranda, a flash of lightning lit his tall, upright frame, unbowed against the gale. The sight steadied Amara's heart. If the roof fell, he seemed the sort of man who would shoulder it himself. When the lights flickered and died, the house sank into candle-lit shadows. The storm roared like a beast battering to break through. Harriet brought out hot tea, but Amara's hands trembled so badly she nearly spilled. Alistair steadied the cup. Careful, he murmured, then sat beside her. Don't be afraid. This house survived the war, even bombs. One storm won't bring it down, but people can fall, Amara whispered, her throat tight. He tilted his head, the flame catching the anguish in her dark eyes. You're not a fragile branch, Amara. You've stood against cruelties fiercer than wind and rain. A crash echoed from upstairs. A window had shattered. Rain and wind burst in. Alistair grabbed a lantern, guiding Amara up with him. They entered the room once intended for children now, only pale yellow walls and a ceiling painted with stars. Rain blew through the broken glass, whipping the curtains wild. Amara froze in the center of the room, her hand instinctively pressing her stomach. Faith. Memories unfinished. A life that never had time. Her eyes stung. Alistair pulled boards across the frame, hammering until the gale was shut. Turning back, he saw her shaking. He stepped close. I'm sorry, he said softly. I shouldn't have brought you here. It recalls too much. No, Amara shook her head, voice breaking. It's because it recalls that I need to stand here. I can't keep running from the shadows. Lightning split the sky, casting her face in pale fire, wan, but unyielding. Alistair paused, then brushed his fingertips against her cheek, as though to wipe away rain. Amara. She looked up. Through the shriek of wind, her pulse thundered. Sir Whitmore, she breathed. I'm afraid. So am I, he answered. Afraid that if I don't take this moment, we'll lose it forever. The distance between them collapsed into breath. Her lips trembled not from cold, but from a long-buried pull. And like two rose canes bending into each other in the storm, they kissed unhurried, unforced, yet deep and real. Amara rested her forehead against his shoulder when they parted, breath ragged. "What if I regret this in the morning?" Alistair stroked her hair gently. "Then I'll still be here patient as this garden. We don't need to name what this is tonight." The storm still raged outside, but Amara felt a strange calm within that small room. She was no longer the abandoned bride, the lost one. She was a woman learning to love again this time, by her choice. By morning, the tempest had passed. The rose garden lay strewn with broken branches and fallen petals, yet amid the wreckage, one bush stood upright, a single bloom open wide, defying the night's assault. Amara gazed at it, fingers tightening around her pruning shears. She thought of herself battered, but blooming still. Alistair came to stand beside her, silent, his eyes saying what words could not. "You are not alone anymore." And within Amara, for the first time in many months, a new flame stirred hope, fierce enough to outshine the storm. The thunderbolt of news struck at noon, just as sunlight pierced the grey London clouds. Harriet rushed into the sitting room, where Amara and Miriam sorted legal papers. "Sir," she panted, "there's a man at the main gate. He calls himself Edmund Hartwell, and he's not alone." Amara's chest clenched. Edmund, no. Lawrence Bridges. The false name cut like a blade. She shot to her feet, legs trembling so severely she had to grip the chair. Alistair's brow furrowed. He stood at once. "I will not let him set foot here." "No." Amara shook her head. "I must face him. This time, I will not run." The household went out to the iron gate. Amara, Alistair, Miriam, Harriet and Inspector Marcus Halloway, who had arrived just in time at a summons. Cold wind swirled dry leaves across the path. On the other side stood Edmund in a rumpled suit, tie askew, still trying to hold the smile that once disarmed Amara. Now it looked like a cracked mask. Beside him was a poised blonde woman, her pregnancy unmistakable. "Amara Ellison," Edmund called, voice half taunt, half pity. "You've made quite the spectacle. This is my wife, Lady Eleanor Fairfax. We need to speak like adults." Amara gripped the bars, her voice unsteady but resolute. "Do not say my name in that voice. I am not your wife. I never truly was." Eleanor glanced at her, blue eyes clouded with confusion. "I'm sorry. He told me you were an old student he helped." I don't understand." Marcus stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Lady Fairfax, I'm afraid you are a victim too. Lawrence Bridges, alias Edmund Hartwell, is under investigation for bigamy, fraud, and embezzlement. Your marriage is valid, but he secretly staged another ceremony with Miss Ellison, and this isn't the only time." Eleanor's face drained of color. "No, it can't be. We have 3 children." Amara met her gaze. "I know. I believed him too. He found me at my father's funeral, spoke the same words he likely spoke to you. The same script, the same lies." Edmund laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You always were dramatic, Amara. You were just a mistake. A venture gone wrong. You should be grateful I left you somewhere safe instead of on the street." The words lashed like icy water. But this time, Amara did not shrink. She stared into the eyes that had once blinded her. "Safe? You abandoned me like a worn coat. You stole my money, my trust, even the child I never got to hold. And now you dare call that kindness." A sharp crack broke the air. Eleanor had slapped him hard, tears streaming down her face. "You betrayed me. And her. And how many more?" Sirens wailed. Vehicles of the Serious Fraud Office swept up the drive, red and blue lights flashing across the gate. Officers stepped out, warrants in hand. "Lawrence Bridges," a commanding female voice rang out. "You are under arrest for financial fraud, bigamy, and deception. You have the right to remain silent." Edmund's face twisted. He spun to flee. But within seconds, 2 officers had his wrists in cuffs. He snarled at Amara. "You ruined everything." She stepped forward, voice clear. "No, you destroyed yourself. I merely stopped covering it up." They shoved him into the van, the door slamming shut. The engine roared, carrying him away from Whitmore Manor this time, for good. Behind the gate, Eleanor crumpled, clutching her stomach, sobbing. Amara knelt beside her, wrapping her in an embrace. They looked at each other not as rivals, but as two women who had survived the same predator. Miriam placed her hands on their shoulders. You are not alone anymore. His cruelty forced you apart, but it has also bound you together. Alistair watched, eyes glistening with pride and sorrow. He spoke softly, as though making a vow. From this day on, no one will stand before this gate alone again. That night, Amara did not sleep. She stood on the veranda, gazing at the rose garden bent under the wind. For the first time in months, the gusts did not frighten her. They sounded instead like the anthem of freedom, the song of a woman who had reclaimed her own name. 6 weeks after the arrest at the Iron Gate, Lawrence Bridges, once Edmund Hartwell, finally stood trial. All of London buzzed with the scandal. Newspapers branded him the man of many marriages, the funeral predator. Each day, new victims came forward, telling the same story. A man appearing when they were most vulnerable, whispering promises, insisting on marriage, then vanishing with their money and their faith. Amara sat in Whitmore Manor's library, clutching the day's paper. Edmund's face filled the front page, no longer charming, but gaunt and twisted. Harriet brought in a cup of tea, placing it without a word. She knew Amara did not need comfort. She was only a witness. On the day of the trial, Amara did not walk alone. At her side was Eleanor Fairfax, her belly heavy with child, her hand gripped tightly by Miriam. Behind them walked Patricia Chen, a widow from Manchester whom Edmund had once ensnared, but had escaped before it was too late. 3 women, 3 survivors entered as one. In the courtroom, when Edmund was led in wearing the orange of a prison uniform, his eyes fixed on Amara. The same old gaze, half challenge, half lure, but this time, Amara did not bow her head. She stared back, her eyes hard as steel. He winked, the old trick, but met only silence, cold and cutting. The prosecutor laid out the case. Layers of financial fraud, overlapping marriage certificates, hidden bank accounts, forged emails. Each piece of evidence struck like a hammer nailing shut Edmund's coffin. When Amara took the stand, her voice rang steady, without tremor. I once believed God sent him. He came to me at my father's funeral. He spoke of the future, of family, of unshakable love. I believed him. I left my work. I left myself to follow. But that love was a trap, and the price I paid was not only money, it was the child I never got to hold. The courtroom stilled. Amara faced the jury. Today, I do not speak to reclaim what I lost. I speak so that no one else will fall into his hands. Justice cannot restore stolen faith, but can ensure that the hurt ends with us no further. Eleanor and Patricia rose in turn. Their voices cracked, but each word peeled another mask from Edmund's face. After days of testimony, the jury needed only 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentence was 10 years in prison, with no parole before 5. From the dock, Edmund roared, face flushed red. You need me. Without me, your lives are empty. I am the reason you exist. Amara rose, and for the first time, she answered him, No, Lawrence. It was when you vanished that we found ourselves. After the verdict, Amara, Eleanor, and Patricia gathered in a small room at the court. Miriam brought tea, Harriet brought biscuits, as though it were no more than a family meeting. Patricia set down her cup. We can't just wait for men like him to be locked away. There are still so many women out there, prey to others like him. Amara's eyes lit with resolve. Then we'll build a fund, an organization, not only for legal aid, but for fresh starts, housing, work, safety. Eleanor laid a hand on her belly, and we'll call it Faith Forward, to remember that from loss, hope can bloom. Miriam clasped their hands. You've turned sorrow into legacy. That is the one victory he will never touch. Back at Whitmore Manor that evening, the roses she and Alistair had tended for months burst into bloom, their fragrance rich in the night air. Alistair waited on the veranda, pride shining in his eyes. Justice has spoken, he said. Amara stepped to him, her smile soft but steady. Now it's our turn to speak, not to him anymore but to the world. Alistair nodded. Then let faith lead the way. Amara gazed at the garden, knowing her new life had begun not from what she had lost, but from what she had chosen to keep: truth, love, and the strength of women standing together. 6 months after the trial, Whitmore Manor wore a different face. The once tangled rosebeds grew in neat, lush, and vibrant rows, bursting with blossoms. At the garden's heart, a pure white rosebush, stood the one Amara and Alistair had planted together, named Faith, to honor the child who never drew breath yet changed everything. That day, sunlight lay soft across the manor. It was not a grand ball, only a simple ceremony in the rose garden. Miriam, dressed in violet silk, stood as celebrant. Her voice carried clearly. Today, we not only witness a marriage, we witness two souls who once knew loss, finding each other. This love does not erase old pain, but turns it into strength. Amara, in a simple white gown, gardenias fragrant in her hands, walked the flowered path. At the other end, Alistair waited, eyes alight as if no storm had ever touched his life. Amara heard her heart whisper when they clasped hands, "This time, this is my choice. No illusions, no lies, only truth and freedom." After the vows, guests gathered around the long table set in the garden. Eleanor sat with her 3 children, the youngest babbling auntie at Amara. Patricia had come from Manchester, carrying plans for a northern branch of Faith Forward. The organization they had founded spread swiftly. In only months, over 100 women had sought help, some fleeing abuse, some escaping fraudulent marriages. All were welcomed with warm arms, safe housing, and legal aid. "This is the true legacy," Amara said in a short speech. "Not what a deceiver left behind, but what survivors build together." When night fell and the guests departed, Amara and Alistair strolled the garden. Lanterns glowed among the trellises, the evening breeze perfumed with roses. "Do you regret it?" Amara asked lightly, half serious. "Walking away from £1,000,000 contracts, only to marry a woman once called a burden?" Alistair chuckled, squeezing her hand. "No, I only regret not meeting you sooner. But perhaps it took loss for us to recognize what was real." They stopped before Faith. The white blossoms glowed under moonlight, like small candles. Amara bent and whispered, "Daughter, I have kept my word. From you, a new future has been planted." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind. "And starting today, we will tend this garden together. Not just for flowers, but as shelter for anyone who needs a place to stand." In the quiet night, Amara knew her story did not end in remarriage, nor only in justice against Edmund. It ended and began in the truth that roses, however cut back, can bloom again. Faith Forward would continue to grow. Eleanor, Patricia, and countless other women would keep walking forward. And Amara, no longer the abandoned bride, was now a woman who knew her worth, a guide who carried truth and compassion like a torch. And in that reborn garden, the roses whispered their tale. Suffering can break us down, but true love and solidarity will always make us bloom again, stronger than ever.